Hi, this is Revenge at Stories. Today we're breaking down a story from the office world and risk operations, one that started as a harmless joke at a Christmas party and ended with our company making the news. This is a story about how small rule bending and one sloppy access decision can destroy a reputation faster than any scandal, if you don't leave a trail and lock down the facts in time. They always held the holiday party in the same place, an event loft above a converted warehouse, all warm string lights and forced cheer, the kind of venue that makes executives feel artistic while they talk about quarterly forecasts. I'm Keelan Mercer. I work in risk operations at a mid-sized payroll fintech called Wreathstone Harbor. Not glamorous, not loud. The job is mostly making sure nothing breaks in a way that makes regulators ask questions. I wore a plain charcoal sweater because I've learned that anything nice becomes a comment later. When I walked in, the first thing I saw was our VP of Operations, Marlon Kestrel, already halfway into his second drink, laughing like the room belonged to him. Next to him was Vesper Lane, my coworker, glittery dress, perfect hair, and a smile that never reached her eyes unless there was an audience. Vesper had a talent. She could turn any criticism into a personality flaw. If you asked for an approval trail, you were paranoid. If you flagged a missing signature, you were difficult. If you asked why a vendor invoice was routed around policy, you were trying to look smart. I'd been on her nerves since late fall when I refused to sign off on a temporary exception that wasn't temporary at all. So when I approached the table, she didn't even wait. "Oh my God," Vesper said, loud enough to pull attention. "Keelan's here. Everyone behave. Trouble just walked in." A few people laughed the way people laugh when they're not sure what they're agreeing with. I glanced at Marlon. He lifted his glass toward me like Vesper had just told a cute story. "Relax," he said. "She's teasing. It's Christmas." And that right there, "It's Christmas," was how they buried everything. Like the calendar made consequences optional. I could have fired back. I didn't. I nodded, said hello to a couple of analysts, and drifted toward the quieter edge of the room. Because here's the thing. Arguing in public gives them a story, and I wasn't there to give them one. I was there because in 2 weeks, Wreathstone Harbor was supposed to onboard a municipal client. City payroll. High visibility. A contract that meant press releases, partnership photos, and leadership victory laps. And there was a problem I couldn't ignore anymore. 2 months earlier, I'd noticed something small. A pattern of manual overrides on identity verification checks for a set of contractors tied to our new vendor, Sablewick Solutions. Manual overrides are supposed to be rare, edge cases. But these were consistent, repeated, and always approved by the same internal admin account. When I pulled the access logs, the account name didn't match the person who used it. It never does when people get careless. I flagged it quietly. I sent an email titled, "Access Anomaly Review, Manual Override Frequency." Marlon replied with one line, "Not urgent. We're in holiday mode." So I did what risk ops people do when leadership smiles and says, "Not urgent." I started building a folder. No drama. No hero speeches, just screenshots, timestamps, and the kind of boring documentation that becomes very exciting. Later, at the party, as the DJ switched to something loud and nostalgic, Vesper drifted toward me again. "You know," she said, leaning close like we were friends, "people would like you more if you didn't act like every spreadsheet is a crime scene." I looked at her, calm, even. "I don't need people to like me," I said. "I need approvals to be real." She smirked. "See? Trouble." Then she turned away and rejoined the laughter, and I let her, because the last time I tried to push back socially, they didn't hear my point. They heard my tone. So I watched. I listened. I noticed who kept disappearing into the hallway where the staff-only doors were. I noticed who kept checking their phone in a way that looked like waiting, not scrolling. And around 10, I saw Marlon step aside with Vesper and Oriana Fisk from HR. The three of them formed a tight little circle, heads close, like you do when you think you're invisible in a crowd. I wasn't close enough to hear words, but I saw Oriana's face. HR faces are trained not to show emotion. When they do, it's because something has crossed the line from awkward to documentable. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that says, "This is about to become my problem." I left the party early, not because I was offended, but because I'd learned something more important than pride. When people call you trouble, they're not joking. They're testing whether you'll swallow it. And I had decided months ago I was done swallowing. The next morning, the office smelled like burnt coffee and fake pine. People moved slower, smiling harder, like the holiday party had been a team-building exercise, instead of what it really was, a loyalty check. Vesper's trouble joke had already turned into a meme in our internal chat. Someone posted a toy police siren with the caption, "Keelan's arriving." I didn't respond. I opened my laptop and went straight to the logs. At 9:17, the admin account I'd been tracking, ops_root, triggered another manual override. Same vendor pipeline, same exact pattern. The thing about systems is they don't care who's popular. They care what happened. I pulled the authentication record. The sign-in source wasn't one of our managed endpoints. Not a company laptop, not an approved virtual desktop. An unmanaged device had touched a privileged function. My stomach tightened. Because when privileged access leaves managed devices, you don't have a process issue. You have a breach-shaped risk. I wrote a short escalation to our internal security mailbox. No accusations. Just 3 attachments. The override list, the authentication record, the policy excerpt stating privileged accounts must be restricted to managed endpoints. My finger hovered over send. Then Marlin appeared in my doorway. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He liked the feeling of being allowed everywhere. "Morning, trouble," he said, smiling like it was still funny. I kept my face neutral. "What's up?" He leaned against the frame. "Quick thing. Oriana mentioned you've been looking into access stuff." "I've been documenting anomalies," I said. Marlin's smile thinned. "Right. That's what I mean. You're creating noise." "It's not noise if it's real," I said. He stepped inside, lowered his voice like he was doing me a favor. "We're onboarding city payroll. We can't afford risk, people spiraling right now. Keep it internal. Don't email security. Don't start a chain." I stared at him. "Why?" His eyes hardened for half a second. Then he put the warmth back on, executive theater. "Because we'll handle it," he said, "and because you're not the hero. You're support." Support. The word landed heavier than it should have. Not because it hurt my ego, but because it revealed how he saw truth. Optional. As long as the onboarding stayed on schedule. He started to leave, then paused like he remembered one more script line. "And about the party," he added. "Vesper was kidding. Don't be sensitive." I watched him walk away, and I made a decision so quiet it didn't even feel like one. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my personality. I didn't write a long email explaining intent. I preserved the record. I forwarded my draft escalation to a personal archive address I'd created the night before. Off-domain, private, not to leak it, not to post it. Just to make sure the timeline couldn't be rewritten later with a smile and a shrug. Then I sent the escalation through the proper internal channel anyway. One clean sentence on top. Requesting security review per privileged access policy. But that was just the beginning. Within an hour, a calendar invite hit my inbox. Quick sync, risk alignment. No agenda. No prep notes. No neutral attendees. Just me, Marlin, Vesper, and Oriana. I walked into the small conference room at 11. Vesper was already there, sitting like she owned the chair. Oriana sat beside her with her hands folded, face controlled. Marlin stood at the whiteboard like he was about to teach a class. "Keelan," he said, "we need to talk about your approach." "My approach is documentation," I said. Vesper let out a soft laugh. See? Trouble. Marlon lifted a hand like he was calming a child. We've noticed, he said. You've been creating friction. People feel monitored. People are monitored, I said. That's what logs are. Oriana's eyes flicked down, tiny, but I saw it. Like she wanted to disappear into the carpet. Marlon's voice stayed smooth. This is about culture, trust. If you keep escalating, you make the team look unstable. Unstable is privileged access from unmanaged devices, I said. Vesper leaned forward, voice sweet. Or maybe you're just bitter because you don't get invited to the fun stuff. I looked at her, and for the first time, I understood the purpose of the joke. It wasn't humor, it was a label, and labels are easier to manage than facts. Oriana finally spoke, careful. Keelan, are you alleging misconduct? I'm alleging an access violation, I said, and I have the records. Marlon's jaw tightened. Records can be misread. No, I said. Records can be inconvenient. Silence. Then Marlon slid a paper across the table. Not a formal plan yet. The first step before it becomes one. The kind of document HR uses to turn a person into a problem on paper. My name was printed neatly at the top. Under it, in clean corporate language, pattern of disruptive communication. Impacts morale. Escalates without alignment. I picked it up and read it twice, and something in me went cold and clear. That night, I stopped being the guy who hoped they'd do the right thing. I became the guy who prepared for what they were obviously going to do next. I nodded once, put the paper in my folder, and said, I understand. Then I walked out, and in the hallway, I opened my notes app and typed one line for myself. They are building the story. I will build a record. And that's when I did the one thing that always saves you in real corporate life. Like we often say on Revenge at Stories, collect evidence, not emotions. Don't argue, he said, she said. Don't try to convince people who've already decided you're the scapegoat. Open a ticket, document the timestamps, save the messages, and make sure the truth leaves a trail that can't be erased with a smile. You learn a lot about an office when you stop looking for fairness and start looking for mechanics. Mechanics are honest. They tell you what people can do, what they can't do, and what they're trying to get away with. By midweek, the troubled jokes had turned into something quieter. Careful smiles, people avoiding my desk, co-workers suddenly remembering they had calls to take when I walked by. Vesper played it perfectly. She'd pass with a sympathetic look, like she was the reasonable one dealing with a difficult man. Marlon stopped speaking to me directly. Everything came through Oriana now. Calendar invites, quick check-ins, policy reminders written in that sterile HR tone. That's how you know a narrative is being drafted. When leadership stops using voices and starts using documentation. I didn't panic. I tightened my process. First, I opened a formal ticket in our internal system. Not a casual message, not screenshots tossed into chat. An actual traceable request with a bland title. Privileged Access Review. Ops_root, I wrote only facts. Timestamps. Frequency. Policy reference. No guesses about intent. No names. Then I requested a retention hold for related logs. People don't realize how fast evidence disappears when the system is doing what it was configured to do. Routine cleanup, automatic retention cycles, storage optimization, convenient words for vanishing context. A couple of hours later, I got a message from Tobin Harrow, our internal security lead. Tobin wasn't friendly, but he was competent, which I trusted more than friendliness. Saw your ticket, he wrote. This is real. Where did you find it? Routine review, I replied. Pattern was too consistent. Do not discuss this in open channels, he sent back. We're pulling full authentication history. I stared at that line, not because it scared me, because it validated me. When security says don't discuss, it means it's not just workplace drama anymore. It's risk with teeth. That afternoon, Oriana appeared at my desk. Can you step into my office? She asked. Her tone was too careful. HR careful is never good. Inside, she closed the door and sat down slowly, like her shoulders had gained weight. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer plainly." I nodded once. "Did you send any information outside the company?" she asked. "No," I said. "I preserved my own record, but I didn't distribute anything." Her exhale was small, but I heard it. Relief. "Okay," she said, and for a second her HR mask slipped. "Marlon thinks you're trying to sabotage onboarding." "I'm trying to stop us from onboarding with a privileged access violation," I said. Oriana's eyes softened, just a fraction. "I believe you." That surprised me. It shouldn't have, but it did. Then she added quieter, "Belief doesn't protect you. Process does." She slid a document across the desk. A meeting notice for Friday morning. Performance alignment discussion. Attendance required. The attendee list included legal. My throat went dry. Legal doesn't join meetings for feelings. Legal joins meetings when someone wants the company to be able to say they handled a problem properly. I went back to my desk and sat there longer than I needed to, staring at my monitor without seeing it. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One sentence. "Stop. You're making enemies." No name. No explanation. No threat. Just the kind of warning that tells you someone is watching the timeline. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot, saved it into my folder, and typed the date and time underneath it. Because if you're going to be the trouble, you might as well be the kind that keeps receipts. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. The next morning, I got to the building early, partly because I wanted time to think, and partly because I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me walk in anxious. I tapped my badge at the front door. Red. I blinked and tried again. Red. The receptionist looked up, confused. "That's weird." I forced a calm smile. "Probably a sync issue." Inside, my pulse was loud. Badge access doesn't fail by accident on a Thursday morning. It fails because someone clicked a box. I stepped aside, opened my email on my phone, and there it was. Subject: temporary access restriction. Policy review, not termination. Something worse in corporate terms, a pause. A gray zone where they can imply guilt without proving it. The body of the email said my access would be restored after a review of communication practices and security boundaries. I read it twice, then a third time, like the words might become less insulting if I stared harder. They didn't. I didn't yell. I didn't call Marlon. I didn't send an emotional reply. I did the one thing I promised myself I would do if they ever tried to bury me quietly. I stayed calm and made the next move real. I called Tobin. He answered on the first ring, voice tight, like he'd already heard something. "Keelan," he said, "did HR lock you out?" "Yes." "Where are you?" "Front entrance." "Good," he said. "Stay there. Do not go home. And do not call anyone in your chain." I swallowed. "What's happening?" There was a pause, brief, controlled. Then Tobin said the sentence that shifted my entire body from dread to focus. "We're escalating." And I realized, suddenly, clearly, Marlon's story had finally collided with something he couldn't manage with a smile. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. They brought me into a small interior office with no windows. The kind of room companies use when they want a conversation to feel contained. Oriana sat across from me, hands folded so tightly her knuckles looked pale. Marlon stood near the wall with his arms crossed, posture rehearsed. And a woman from legal, Luce Calder, opened a laptop like she was about to read a weather report. Marlon started first, smooth and confident. "This is about inappropriate escalation," he said, "and external risk creation." I looked straight at Luce. "Is this about security or culture?" Luce didn't blink. "Both." That was the corporate trick. Blend a concrete issue with a vague one so you can punish someone without admitting which part you're punishing. Marlon nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Keelan has been creating friction," he said. "He's been implying misconduct without alignment. People feel monitored." I kept my voice even. Privileged actions are monitored. That's the point. Oriana's eyes flicked toward Marlin, then down again. She looked like someone forced to sit at a table where she already knew the ending. Luz tapped a key on her laptop. Keelan, did you share information outside the organization? No, I said. I filed an internal ticket. I preserved my own timeline. I did not distribute. Marlin let out a small breath, like he'd been hoping I'd slip and give him something easy. Then the door opened. Tobin Harrow walked in. He didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He walked straight to the table and dropped a thick printed packet in front of Luz. I'm going to make this simple, Tobin said. Your privileged account was compromised. Marlin's head snapped toward him. Compromised is a strong word. Tobin didn't react. He flipped to a page and tapped it with his finger. Unmanaged device sign-in, he said. Repeated manual override execution. Credential reuse pattern. And the device fingerprint traces back to a personal tablet registered to... He paused just long enough for the room to tighten. Vesper Lane. The air changed. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. Oriana's face drained like someone had pulled a plug. Marlin blinked once, then forced out a laugh that sounded wrong. That's not possible. Tobin's eyes stayed flat. It's not only possible, it's documented. Luz leaned forward, reading. Her expression didn't move much, but the speed of her eyes did. Marlin tried to pivot. Even if that's true, Keelan's behavior... Tobin cut him off, calm and brutal. Keelan followed policy. You attempted to suppress reporting. That sentence hit the room like a dropped metal bar. Because once security says suppress reporting, legal stops thinking about culture. Legal starts thinking about liability. Luz looked up at Marlin. Did you instruct him not to contact security? Marlin's mouth opened, closed. He tried to find the version of the truth that sounded reasonable. I told him we'd handle it internally, he said. Luz's voice cooled. Security is internal. Tobin turned another page. The compromised account was used to bypass verification on vendor-linked contractor profiles. Some of those profiles were paid out. That means we're looking at potential fraudulent disbursement exposure, Oriana whispered, barely audible. Oh my God! Marlin stared at the table like it might save him. Then Tobin added the part that made my stomach clench again. Not fear, but the weight of what was now inevitable. This gets worse, he said. We have an inbound inquiry from a local investigative desk. They're asking for comment on a whistleblower complaint, tied to the city payroll onboarding. Marlin's face hardened. Whistleblower? Luz's eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second. Not accusing, measuring. I met her gaze. Not me, I said. I used internal process. And it was true. I didn't leak. I didn't call reporters. I didn't post anything. I filed a ticket and preserved my timeline. But someone had gone outside, or the city's procurement office had noticed inconsistencies, or a regulator feed had triggered a public records request. Real life has a dozen ways of becoming public without a movie villain. Luz stood up. We are issuing a legal hold, effective immediately. No deletions, no system changes, no personnel actions related to this matter without legal approval. She looked at Marlin. You are not to contact anyone in your org without council direction. Marlin tried to speak. Luz didn't let him. She turned to Oriana. Lock down access changes and document all prior actions. Then she looked at Tobin. Isolate systems and preserve logs. Finally, she looked at me. Keelan, she said, your access restriction is reversed. You're reinstated, and you will preserve your documentation. Micro-catharsis hit me like a quiet shock. The story they were writing about me, disruptive, unstable, trouble, just collapsed under the weight of a log file. Marlin's jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw fear under his confidence. He made one last attempt to control the narrative. This is chaos, he said. We're going to lose the client. Tobin stared at him. You already did. You just don't know it yet. And then my phone buzzed, a news alert. The headline wasn't vague, it wasn't rumor. It had our company name, the city payroll keyword, and the phrase internal access concerns. By midnight, the news exposed our office, not because of revenge, because of receipts. When your workplace tries to label you instead of addressing facts, stop defending your personality. Document behavior. Use tickets, timestamps, and policy language, boring tools that hold up under scrutiny. And the moment someone says, don't create a paper trail, hear what they really mean. They're afraid of paper. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was excited, because I could feel the building shifting, like the company's culture had finally run into physics. At 2 a.m, Wreathstone Harbor posted a statement, carefully worded, legally padded, full of phrases like reviewing concerns and maintaining trust. No names, no accountability, just a promise that sounded good enough for social media and empty enough for court. By 8, the office felt like a different place. People whispered in hallways. Managers stopped making jokes. The internal chat went quiet, then restarted with stiff professionalism. Careful phrasing, no memes, and no sarcasm. Everyone suddenly remembered we were a regulated payroll company. Vesper didn't show up. Marlin did, but he looked smaller. Not physically, structurally. Like someone had removed the invisible scaffolding he'd been standing on. He kept checking his phone as he walked, thumb tapping the screen in quick, sharp motions, like there was a version of the day where he still controlled the story, and he was trying to refresh his way back into it. At 9, Luce Calder scheduled an all-hands operational pause meeting. When she spoke, she didn't use holiday softness. She used legal clarity. Access controls were breached, she said. An investigation is underway. Any interference will be treated as misconduct. Then she said the line that mattered most to me. And no employee will face retaliation for good faith reporting. I watched Marlin's face as she said it. It wasn't anger. It was defeat. Because retaliation is a trapdoor word. Once it's in the room, every prior action gets relabeled. Every email becomes evidence. Every badge lockout becomes a potential exhibit. Before lunch, the city payroll onboarding was officially suspended, announced by the city, not by us. That detail was important. When the client announces the pause first, it means they don't trust you to frame the truth. By mid-afternoon, Tobin had system access frozen on every privileged account tied to operations. The override function was restricted. Audit retention was locked. The boring, unglamorous safety rails were back on, and suddenly leadership couldn't freestyle anymore. At 2, Oriana asked me to come to her office. This time she didn't look like she was trying to disappear. She looked tired, but solid. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't, I replied. I do, she said. I let Marlin frame you as a culture problem. I should have pushed harder earlier. I studied her face and believed she meant it. I didn't need you to believe me, I said. I needed you to stop the paperwork from turning into a weapon. She nodded once. That's why I called you in. She slid a document across the desk. Not a warning, not a plan. A transfer offer, risk operations, expanded scope, direct line to security, and a reporting structure that moved me out from under Marlin's org entirely. It wasn't a trophy. It was protection. And I understood the difference. What happens to Marlin? I asked. Oriana's mouth tightened. Administrative leave pending investigation. And Vesper? Oriana's eyes didn't move. Separated for cause. Policy violation, fraud investigation pending. I leaned back in my chair and let the air leave my lungs slowly. I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt quiet. Because revenge isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's watching someone realize they can't talk their way out of a log file. Later that week, I walked past the same entrance where my badge had flashed red. This time it flashed green. Small thing, but it mattered. Inside, the receptionist smiled like nothing had happened. That's another corporate truth. Buildings forget quickly. People don't. As I headed toward the elevators, one of the analysts, someone who'd avoided my desk for days, stopped me. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "I'm sorry about the jokes." I didn't lecture him. I didn't punish him with a speech. I kept my voice even. "It's fine," I said. "Just don't help anyone write a story about me again." He nodded fast, like he understood what that meant now. At home that night, I made coffee and sat in silence, letting the quiet settle in my chest. I thought about the party, the laughter, the label. And I realized the most satisfying part wasn't that they got caught. It was that I didn't have to scream to be heard. I didn't beg for fairness. I didn't become cruel to become strong. I just did what I always did. Only this time, I did it for myself. Because in offices like that, the most dangerous person isn't trouble. It's the person who stays calm, keeps records, and refuses to play the role they're assigned. And they finally understood the truth they'd been joking about all along. If you call someone trouble long enough, one day the truth shows up, and you find out you were warning people about the wrong person. What do you think about this case? Write in the comments on Revenge at Stories. Have you ever been in a situation where they tried to label you as the problem instead of admitting there was a real hole in the process? And what would you do? Stay quiet for the sake of team harmony, or document the facts before it becomes headline news.